무모한 도발을 걸어온다면 우리 혁명 무력은 즉시 선멸적인 타격을 가할 것이며 전면 전쟁에는 전면 전쟁으로.
In a new North Korean propaganda video, the White House and an aircraft carrier are in the crosshairs. A carrier and the U.S. Capitol are shown blowing up.
President Donald Trump said Thursday a major conflict with North Korea is possible in the standoff over its nuclear and missile programs, but he would prefer a diplomatic outcome to the dispute. Dale Hurd has the story.
In a propaganda video that looks like a low-budget 1960s action movie, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is seen reviewing more military maneuvers. North Korea's UN mission says the government will react to a total war with the United States with a nuclear war. President Trump told Reuters, indeed, there could be a war.
Well, there's a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely.
I mean, there's not going to be a markedly different message here. We've been working from literally almost day one with the Chinese, making clear to them our concerns about North Korea and the fact that we need to see them do more. And we talked about this yesterday, not in the coming years, not in, we need to see concrete action taken over the course of the short term, because this threat is only increasing. And so we've already had productive discussions with China about possible steps in applying pressure, and those are going to continue tomorrow. But, I think, and we talked a little bit about the optics yesterday, but tomorrow is going to send a clear message to North Korea that its behavior, its actions are only isolating it further and further from the rest of the world.
With each successive detonation and missile test, North Korea pushes Northeast Asia and the world closer to instability and broader conflict. The threat of a North Korean nuclear attack on Seoul or Tokyo is real, and it is likely only a matter of time before North Korea develops the capability to strike the U.S. mainland. North Korea exploits its diplomatic privileges to fund its illicit nuclear and missile technology programs, and constraining its diplomatic activity will cut off a flow of needed resources.
I'm afraid. We should reject any claims.
We must increase North Korea's financial isolation. We must levy new sanctions on DPRK entities and individuals supporting its weapons and missile programs and tighten those that are already in place.
Oral equivalence.
저국을 믿음직하게 수호하며 당이 가리키는 한 방향으로만 손꼽을 내대고 나아가는 사상과 신념의 전이 되어 세상에는 낮 당기와 최고 사령관기를 펄펄 휘날리며 진출하는 대규모 포병 집단의 장엄한 절의 흐름은 조선혁명의 초창기 기치 높이 억척같이 다져온 우리 혁명무력의 전투력과 모진막강한 위력을 과시하며 수 킬로미터의 해안가에 즐비하게 늘어선 300여 문의 대구경 자행포들. 경야는 최고령도 자동직께서 명령만 내 우리의 날개 위엔 태양이 있고 우리의 날개 아래엔 평양이 있다는 순정의 마음을 지니고 당중앙을 사수하는 미로운 비행사들이 있어 저국의 하늘은 언제나 맑고 푸른 것입니다.
escalation with North Korea. Should Americans be worried?
I don't think so. The president understands the threat. He's taken tremendous time to make sure that he utilizes the diplomatic, political, and economic tools at his disposal. We're having tremendous success utilizing China to diplomatically use the pressure that they have with Korea, both economically and politically, to our advantage. And that's a result of the relationship that President Trump built with President Xi during their two-day visit to Mar-a-Lago. I think the relationship they built there and the relationships that he's rebuilding around the world are paying dividends for the United States.
现在是上午的9点钟，户外的雨依然还在下。截止到目前呢，还有。
Beneath an unassuming house about an hour east from Osaka is Seiichiru Nishimoko's life project. The model of a shelter built to withstand the force of a nuclear attack. He uses it as a showcase to sell purification systems designed to strip radiation and poisonous gas from the air. They cost as much as $30,000. He's never been busier. Getting too many calls to handle, he had to take his number off the company website.
When I started 55 years ago, people said I was a fool, crazy, and they mocked me. The time has now come for me to help protect the lives of the people and families.
One security expert puts the chances of a North Korea missile attack at 50-50. Japan has a sophisticated anti-missile defense system, but if an attack is launched, it'll most likely be multiple missiles. That makes it tough to shoot them all down. Takashi Kawakami says that if North Korean leader Kim Jong-un decides to pull the trigger, he will launch whatever he has.
Yeah, it looked like targeting to a U.S. base in Japan, but maybe not. Even that, maybe they are going targeting to a big city, maybe. We are not sure, because in the case with that, Kim Jong-un probably think about the wow, this is a final chance for his life.
And fear of that is growing in Japan. Visits to the government webpage on disaster and attack preparedness have risen recently.
I'm genuinely scared. You never know when something is going to happen. The alert system was set off by mistake a number of times, and even if it's activated, I wouldn't know where to run.
I am worried, but when I read about them, I hear they use old recycled parts for their weapons, but they can't be undermined, and that makes me anxious.
Some risk psychology experts say this fear is out of proportion to reality, fanned by the near constant media coverage on the growing tension.
There is fear about the unknown, but it is a fictitious, imaginary fear. What they feel is fear stoked by the government.
Regardless of where the fear is coming from, it's moving some Japanese to prepare for nuclear attack. Seiichiru Nishimoko says conflict is part of the human saga, and that's bound to keep him busy for the foreseeable future.
Добрый день. Обстановка там продолжает деградировать. В основе этой тенденции нежелание противоборствующих сторон отказаться от конфронтационных подходов и ставки на силовые методы решения существующих проблем в пользу диалога и позитивные повестки дня. И, конечно, особую беспокойность вызывает концентрация ударной группировки ВМС США в регионе Северо-Восточной Азии и ответная воинственная риторика Пхеньяна. Собственно, в этом и суть нагнетания ситуации.
China's top diplomat vowed to keep communication lines open with Russia and to further work on strengthening the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries. Wang Yi said the two sides should adhere to the UN Security Council's sanctions on the DPRK while ensuring international peace and stability. On the same day, Wang Yi also met with former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
China's defense ministry continues to voice opposition to South Korea's deployment of the third anti-missile defense system. During a media conference on Thursday, spokesperson Yang Yu-jun reiterated China's opposition and pledged to continue with live-fire drills to safeguard national security.
THAAD is damaging the strategic balance and security in the region, and China strongly opposes the deployment of THAAD. The Chinese military will continue to conduct specific exercises and training for real combat and continue with operational tasks on new weapons and equipment, resolutely safeguarding national security and regional peace and stability.
U.S. President Donald Trump threw some curveballs to South Korea with regards to the THAAD missile defense system and Washington's bilateral trade pact with Seoul. Connie Kim shares with us the latest comments from the always controversial former reality show star and real estate mogul.
U.S. President Donald Trump came down hard on South Korea during his exclusive interview with Reuters, raising doubts about two pillars of their bilateral relationship. Trump says he wants a renegotiation or termination of the South Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and that Seoul should pay for the THAAD missile defense system. The bilateral trade pact was a recurring theme during Trump's presidential campaign, and he repeatedly threatened to pull out of the, quote, job-killing deal. If Trump's comments sound familiar,
it's unacceptable. It's a horrible deal made by Hillary. It's a horrible deal, and we're going to renegotiate that deal or terminate it.
It's because Vice President Mike Pence had said during a recent visit to Seoul that the U.S. would work to revise the FTA. Trump also dropped the bombshell about the THAAD missile defense system. He said Seoul should pay for the U.S. military hardware, which he estimated at a staggering $1 billion U.S. dollars.
So, I informed South Korea that it would be appropriate if they paid. Nobody's going to do that. Why are we paying $1 billion? It's a $1 billion system. It's phenomenal. It's the most incredible equipment you've ever seen. It shoots missiles right out of the sky. And it protects them, and I want to protect them. We're going to protect them. But they should pay for that, and they understand that.
But an official from Seoul's foreign ministry said it has never been informed of related information. Trump's comments also appear to go against the current status of forces agreement between the two countries, which says Washington should foot the bill for the deployment and operation of a single THAAD system, while Seoul pays for the land and relevant facilities. The THAAD deployment is a key issue in the presidential election set for May 9th. Frontrunner Moon Jae-in has said the deployment should be delayed until a new administration takes office, while the U.S. accelerates the installation.
There's new and heated rhetoric between the U.S. and North Korea. CNN's Will Ripley is live in Pyongyang, North Korea for us. He is the only Western television journalist in North Korea. What's the latest, Will?
Hey, Allison. Well, just as President Trump talks about the possibility of a major conflict, we're getting the rhetoric ratcheted up here in Pyongyang as well. Let me read you this commentary from KCNA, the North Korean mouthpiece. It says, quote, in case a war breaks out on the peninsula, the U.S. will be held wholly accountable for it, no matter who made preemptive attack. This is a week where we've seen a large-scale military exercise here in North Korea with hundreds of long-range artillery fired simultaneously. We saw North Korea release a chilling new propaganda video showing a simulated attack on the White House and the Capitol in Washington, also on the USS Carl Vinson carrier strike group using North Korea's land-based ballistic missile, the Pukguksong-2. And you have North Korean officials on the ground speaking with us here, defiantly reacting to the news out of China that China seems to be more willing now than in the past to work with the United States to try to rein in North Korean leader Kim Jong-un using their economic leverage. Officials here are telling us even though they trade heavily with China, even though China is a major source of this country's oil supply, they say even if China were to pull the cord, pull the plug, they will still continue to build nuclear weapons and missiles, and they will continue to test them because they feel they are entitled to have these weapons to protect their national sovereignty. They filed complaints with the UN Security Council. Of course, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson chairing that big meeting today with the Security Council. North Korea will be watching it all very closely. Chris and Allison.
Aside from the decades-old dispute over islands in the Pacific Ocean and the signing of more economic deals, the Russian president and Japanese prime minister focused on North Korea.
We call on all the countries involved in regional issues to refrain from military rhetoric and strive for calm and constructive dialogue. We see as a common task the early resumption of six-party talks.
President Putin and I agreed that Japan and Russia will continue to closely cooperate and appeal to North Korea to fully comply with the UN Security Council resolutions and avoid further provocative actions.
Public agreement, but there are differences in the detail.
I think Abe is trying to bring the message that Russia should be cooperative with the US, that Russia should be open to the idea of new sanctions, and that Russia should be constructive and use its influence over North Korea. I think that's a fairly unrealistic assessment because Russia doesn't really have a lot of influence, but it tries to portray itself as a very influential.
Regardless, it's providing a source of amusement for Russian state television. This is the weatherman showing off the doomsday clock, saying the threat of Armageddon was only closer in 1958. Not even the Cuban Missile Crisis was as bad as it is now. He says these are allegedly bunkers in Pyongyang, and these are, again allegedly, President Trump's personal bunkers in the White House and 2 under golf courses in Florida. Tongue-in-cheek for sure, but the concerns on the North Korean peninsula are real. The Kremlin maintains that the North Korean issue should be resolved through dialogue, using diplomacy rather than military might to ease tensions. But critics say Russia is not doing enough, that despite public condemnation of North Korea's actions, it needs to do more to put pressure on Pyongyang. Russia has a 17-kilometer land border with North Korea. North Korean laborers work in Russia's Far East, sending home money from which the North Korean government takes a cut. A ferry service between the 2 countries is set to start early next month, supposedly bringing workers, Chinese tourists and some goods. And the timing with the increased tension, certainly not ideal. Russia's argument, keeping good relations, can go a long way to de-escalate tensions. This video apparently shows Russian military reinforcements sent to the border with North Korea earlier this month, and the Kremlin declined to comment. The rise in rhetoric has all the countries involved, and there are many, concerned. But one thing is clear, they all say they don't want the situation to escalate.
Good morning.
President Rodrigo Duterte may seem like everything a typical diplomat is not. He is unapologetic and impatient when it comes to the rituals to diplomacy. And so his chairmanship of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, this year is seen here as a major test. Many wonder if Duterte can go beyond his usual rhetoric and preside as chairman. Duterte has already promised to do so. He said this week's summit in Manila will be all about building a common agenda. Issues on law enforcement, migrant workers, and armed groups will be discussed. But the most thorny issue of all here is China. Its claim of nearly all of the vital waterways in the South China Sea has led to disputes with at least 3 ASEAN member states. A framework on a code of conduct between China and ASEAN is expected to lay the ground rules that will guide navigation and exploration in disputed waters. But it has been dragging for many years now. During his recent interview with Al Jazeera, Indonesian President Joko Widodo talked about the urgency of finding a resolution.
With China, we have a good relationship. That's why we want the situation in the South China Sea to be solved through dialogue. Don't heat up tensions in this region because this will affect economic growth in this region. We hope that the Code of Conduct Agreement has to be implemented as soon as possible.
But many worry about where the Philippine government stands on the issue because of its closeness with Beijing. Duterte has set aside an international tribunal's ruling striking down China's claims in the South China Sea.
I won't be surprised if President Duterte later this year kind of implies that if ASEAN wants to move forward as a common economic community, China will be our #1 partner. And I think this is the growing realization in the region. We might get an agenda overload whereby we talk about so many things, but the capacity of ASEAN is nowhere near to focus on all of these issues.
There is also that growing tension in the Korean peninsula. North Korea isn't on the official agenda, but is likely to dominate unofficial talks on the sidelines of the summit. ASEAN has always described itself as a catalyst for peace, providing a venue for stability in a tug-of-war between major world powers like China and Russia. But its neutrality is also being seen here as its major flaw. Many question just how much it has accomplished over the last 50 years. There is a sense of urgency now, especially during these troubled times in the South China Sea.
Sinasabing ito ang pagkakasaksak ng ekonomiya ng Pilipinas. Ang Armed Forces of the United States of America. Kapuluhang pagbabago. Patuloy po natin idiin ang kahimula po sa mga kabataang estudyante na sinabi.
May hangin ba dyan sa loob? Walang ilaw.
Gano'n na po kayo katagal dyan?
Gano'n na kayo katagal dyan? Ha? Anong araw? Ikaw, ilang araw na po? Wala kayo.
So yung hidden jail na balita mo, yung sa MPD Station 1, yung may secret jail?
Secret jail daw po sa mga drugs.
Hindi ko nakita. Meron silang?
Sa Tondo raw po, sa Pusinto, merong isang hidden detention cell na nakatabing lang po yung cabinet. Tapos pinagkasya po yung siya po 10 detainees na hindi naman daw po silang pangkaso. Pero apparently, drug-related cases daw po yun lang.
And the policemen are allegedly extorting from them.
Yes.
I will look into this and then I will call Mato.
The Royal Air Force will carry out its enhanced air policing role in the region from Romania until September, when it will hand over to another NATO ally.
The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Ambassador Haley, thanks for coming on once again.
Thanks so much, Jake.
So today you confronted your Russian counterpart on the UN Security Council about Russia's support for the Assad regime and their continued vetoes against any UN resolution about Assad. You said this. Take a listen.
Russia continues to cover for a leader who uses chemical weapons against his own people. Assad continues to do these things because they know Russia will continue to cover for them.
So I guess, Ambassador, my question is, you've been a very forceful advocate against the brutality we've seen from the Assad regime and Russia being a patron of it. But beyond the tough talk, is there anything that the Trump administration is prepared to do to get the Russians to cooperate in terms of sanctions or anything else?
Well, first of all, let's look at the actual situation. I mean, there are people dying by the day because they're not getting humanitarian aid that they need because the Assad regime is keeping it out and not allowing it to get in. Now, today, the Russians basically said, look, the reason that this is happening is because they need all that medical care for the military. Well, the military doesn't need baby formula. The military doesn't need diapers. The military doesn't need dialysis treatment. That is what they're keeping from the people who are in need. And so what you've got is a regime who's saying, you either bow down to us or we're going to starve you to death. And Russia is allowing this to happen. And there was a report released today about how awful the humanitarian issue was, and Russia then criticized the report. But at the end of the day, the international community needs to put all eyes on Russia, all the pressure on Russia, because every day that people die in Syria, it's all on Russia's hands in that way. And so what we're doing is we're going to continue to push. We did have a Security Council resolution a few weeks ago, and Russia was the only one that vetoed it, so they're standing on an island. So we'll continue to take it and push it as best we can and see what we need to do.
But no plans right now for any additional sanctions against Russia for this barbarity that they are supporting.
We are continuing to talk about the issue, and I think we'll handle it accordingly.
And begin with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad saying that Israel is supporting terrorists by striking positions of his country's army.
It is playing this role in different forms. First, by direct aggression, particularly by using warplanes, artillery or missiles against Syrian army positions. Second, it is supporting terrorists in two ways. First, by providing direct support in the form of weapons, and second, by providing logistic support, that is, allowing them to conduct military exercises in the areas it controls. It also provides them with medical assistance in its hospitals.
Since the beginning of the crisis of the war on Syria,
Assad made the remarks after an Israeli missile strike targeted a Syrian military base southwest of the capital Damascus. Iran and Russia have both also condemned the attack. Iran's defense minister Hossein Dekhan described Israel as a rogue entity, stressing Islamic Republic considers Tel Aviv an occupying regime. Meanwhile, Moscow slammed the missile strike and called for respecting Syria's sovereignty. The Syrian army says missiles slammed into the base near the Damascus International Airport were launched from inside Israel. And joining us for more on the story out of Ontario is Mr. Jason Unruhe, political commentator and analyst. Hello, sir, and thanks for joining us on the program. So, my first question to you, sir, why does Israel continue to support this extremist foreign-backed terrorist insurgency against the Syrian government?
Well, I think the answer is that Syria and Iran are two of the last few countries that are actually maintaining a form of Arab independence in the region. Two of the countries left that are not direct or not allies of the United States and Israel and their collective interests. And this is the second time that people on the rebel side, the larger powers who are supporting them, have carried out a strike against Syria in their favor. But this really is a result of the antagonistic relationship between Syria and the United States, being one of the few countries left in the Middle East that doesn't toe its particular interests.
And what does this attack say about Israel? Then we know that Israel has practically attacked all of its neighbors surrounding it. So, I mean, and this is coming from the self-proclaimed lone democracy of the Middle East. Your thoughts?
Oh, well, obviously there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy here. To even claim that Israel is the only democracy is frankly false. Iran is a democracy. Syria is a democracy. Palestine is a democracy. There's many countries. This is all about entirely demonizing everyone who doesn't stand for the United States' interests and its proxy state, Israel. And this is a very common theme. Israel can carry out all kinds of attacks against its neighbors with absolute impunity, and no one stands up to them. The United States backs up everything they do, and the UN rarely even says any harsh words about it. It's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy.
Roberts County in the Texas Panhandle is one of the most sparsely populated counties in the nation. Fewer than 1,000 people live here. But it's #1 when it comes to the election of Donald Trump as president.
Donald Trump is now 100 days into his term.
Yes, sir.
On a 1 to 10 scale, what would you give him?
I would give him a 10.
95% of Roberts County voters picked Donald Trump to be their president, the highest percentage of any county in the nation. But many voters we talked to in the county seat, which is pronounced Miami, are concerned not so much about the president, but concerned for him.
He's been doing his job. Congress has not been doing their job.
Concerned because of the establishment.
One of his promises was he would drain the swamp. Do you feel he's draining the swamp?
The swamp's fighting back.
Many of the Trump voters we've talked with here tell us they believe the president won't be able to fulfill many of his promises if he doesn't get help from others. Who hasn't helped Donald Trump be a good president?
Both the Democrats and the Republicans.
So you think the Republican-led Congress is not helping the president?
And especially the head of the Republican Congress. I don't think it's helped him.
Well, you're talking about Paul Ryan.
I'm talking about Paul Ryan.
So you don't put any of the blame on Donald Trump?
Oh, no, I put some blame on Donald Trump, but he is trying to do something that's better than what we had the last 8 years.
The act of trying means a lot here. Do you feel he's kept his promises that he made for the first 100 days?
He's trying to.
We ask about his contract with the American voters, where Donald Trump vowed to work with Congress to introduce 10 legislative measures and fight for their passage in the first 100 days.
9 of them have not been introduced. Only Obamacare right here has been introduced, and it failed. So he hasn't kept his end of this contract.
When has he had time?
Well, he's had 100 days.
He's had 100 days, but he's had the Russian thing thrown at him. He's got a big problem with Korea thrown at him. It's not like he's been sitting on his thumb doing nothing.
So here's the question for you. Is a promise a promise? If you don't keep a promise, is that a problem?
A promise is a promise as long as you're working on it. When you throw your hands up and say, I can't do it, it's no longer a promise. It's a broken promise. But he has not thrown his hands up.
Well, Donald Trump will be president for 100 days on Saturday, but the milestone apparently has Mr. Trump in something of a nostalgic mood. He told Reuters that this whole president thing wasn't exactly what he expected.
Well, I loved my previous life. I loved my previous life. I had so many things going. I actually, this is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier. I thought it was more of I'm a details-oriented person. I think you would say that. But I do miss my old life.
More work, less privacy. Who would have thought it?